And we're recording. Okay, hi Brie. Thank you so much for meeting me and for agreeing to be our Themis Shero of the month. We are very happy to have you here with us. So I'm just
Thank
gonna,
you for inviting me.
yeah, I'm going to ask you some questions and let's see how we get on. So we always start with a quick checking in. So how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling quite tired, but in a good place, really good place.
That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
I've
And
had a couple of days cross-examining this week, which I always enjoy. Save up the nasty me for that bit.
I love that. And what's the biggest ray of hope for you at the moment?
Oh, the biggest ray of hope. Well, if I'm thinking big rays,
Hmm.
I'm still trying to hold on to the idea that coming out of the last year plus that we've had, that people will reevaluate the social contract and actually think about the way we undervalue the important things in life, and more significantly the people who are doing the most important jobs. And I say that as someone whose work is very much in the privately funded
Hmm.
end of the bar. Property, it's really important stuff, it's people's homes and places of work, etc., etc. But the idea that I get paid so much more than people doing criminal work, family work, the publicly funded work, is just screams to me that we've got our priorities wrong. So my ray is hope is that all of this pulling together, being in it together,
Mm.
those things do actually stay as an ongoing theme, um, and lead to shifts and changes. I'm finding it hard to hold on to that ray though.
Hopefully, we'll see some changes soon, slowly coming out of lockdown and everything else. We'll see how people react to the new freedoms.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm really very concerned about my right to protest being interfered with, but that's a whole other conversation.
Well, one that we can have, absolutely. And if there is anything you want to mention about that, we'll be happy to have that conversation and discussion on here or not. But it's quite related to my next question, actually, because I know that you were very involved in the women's movement as a teenager.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of protesting, I imagine. So how I just wanted to know how that has affected your career, your practice, but also how maybe that affects your views on new policies, such as the ones that are trying to restrain our right to protest.
Yeah. I mean, my mum and I were talking in the context of obviously the proposed can't speak, the proposed attack on the right to protest. We were talking about the fact that actually the first march I went on was with her in the 70s, Reclaim the Night. And we're still having to
Mm-hmm.
same protests, same issues. So that's quite
Mm-hmm.
disheartening. But I mean, there are a number of ways, sort of globally, my view, my thoughts externally were influenced by that early experience of being involved in the women's movement, but also my own personal journey with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I my mum was an active feminist. I, through her from 11 onwards, was getting involved in things, got very involved in the abortion rights campaign at a point when there was a major attack on abortion rights and various other things, and involved in various women's groups. And my experiences there were of two messages coming to me when I was talking about wanting to come to the bar and be a barrister. And some of the women were sort of like, you can't do that, you'll be part of the establishment, that's, being a traitor, da, 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 da. And others were saying, go for it, change it, be changing it from the inside. So I suppose I sort of formulated in my mind this sort of idea of, come the day of the revolution, I'm ready. But in the meantime, I'm going to try this way. When the revolution is happening, great, but it wasn't looking like it was going to happen any minute now. I mean, that's being slightly flippant, but I think you get the idea that, you know, there is the sort of active protesting, challenging, but then there's also looking at the structures and institutions that exist and being a part of actually moving into those, demonstrating that a much wider range of people have something to contribute in those and can succeed in them. And then having done that, using your elbows to push more space for yet more variety and diversity to come through. But that experience did translate for me on a very, very personal level to a quite peculiar, when I think about it, standing outside of myself effect, that I was very, very clear that I didn't want to be changed by becoming a member of this profession, that I didn't want to become it. I wanted to be in it and to, I wouldn't have used this language at the time, but to be an agent for change in it and for widening it and broadening it and making it richer, but not to assimilate, basically. And in my head, in my early 20s, in my naivety, I sort of thought, oh, well, as long as I don't take silk, then I'll know I'm not part of the establishment. I'll know I've not become that. And so I sort of had this real thing that I was never going to do that. And then, of course, it reached a point in my career where people say to me, you should be taking silk. Why aren't you doing this? And clever people around me, particularly in Chambers, my chief exec and my former head of Chambers, who had always been an amazing mentor to me, sort of saying, well, women, you know, you think it's really important that there are different people at the bar and that it's opening up for a wider section. You can't have got to where you are and not take that step. You can't be here and not then be seen to be doing exactly what you said. But I had a real emotional block about it. And I don't know if you know the Women of the World Festival that happens at the South Bank.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most years. Well, I did the speed mentoring there. Yeah, with this really sort of weighing on me, because it felt unsafe to me to step into this space, because I'd spent so long sort of like, not going there, I'm fine, I'm doing this thing, I'm being me, I'm not being that. And it was actually a couple of the women, you know, just 15-minute chats in the speed mentoring that sort of made me flip it around and think, actually, you've been walking through this space, not assimilating, being yourself, being true to yourself. Crossing that one's not going to make a difference. So, yeah. And that was a sort of full circle back to having conversations with feminists completely divorced from the law, who actually were then allowing me to see it in a far more constructive way. So, yeah, that's my weird personal and bigger picture journey.
I love that.
Impacting my career.
I love that. And if I can just ask, could you define what feminism means to you?
Oh, what it means for me. It means for me the drive for equality. That's the big thing. So what does that mean? I enter it, and as a feminist you enter it from a gender perspective. But it's not about being the same or being treated the same. It's about equal value, equal opportunity, equal power, equal privilege. So for me, it's about removing the things that are barriers to that, whether institutional, structural, perception, political, where they are actual barriers, you know, which might be around, say, disability or something. It's about finding ways to equalise, to level the playing field. And so for me, whilst the entry point is around gender and particularly women, but not always women, there are many instances where actually, you know, there is a disadvantage for men.
Mm-hmm.
I volunteer as a Samaritan. I'm acutely aware of the very, very high levels of young male suicide. And, that speaks volumes about our society not working for them.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the entry point is about particularly women across gender, but it's actually about all of us being able to fulfill our potential and not be trampled. I don't know. It's not a learned academic approach. It's very much comes from here and about humanity for me.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's really interesting to see, you grew up with the feminist movement, and the feminist movement has also evolved since you started. I mean, the feminist movement has evolved in the last 4 years. So it's quite interesting to see how everyone else takes it, like with a very kind of personal point of view, and makes it its own.
I mean, my mum and I obviously talk about experiences we both had in the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
being active in the women's movement. And my mum was, I'm so proud of my mum. She, along with a number of other women in Reading, set up the first Reading, Berkshire Women's Aid Refuge. It was a very early one, not the first, that was Chiswick, Everpitsy, but it was very early on in that development. So she was very active in that. I got involved in various other things. But both of us experienced that sort of, what always saddens me when I think about it, and it saddens me when I see it now,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of, I suppose it's the antithesis of intersectional feminism.
Mm-hmm.
So my mum experienced as a active feminist who was married and had children, including a boy child, being told by some women that she wasn't a feminist and she couldn't be a feminist because she lived with a man.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a boyfriend at the time and had similar experiences, and that just, it's like, no, you're not getting it. It's wasting energy, it's directing anger at the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, from what I've described as my sense of what my feminism is, it's obviously the antithesis of that. But I think that probably helped me really understand what my feminism was, to experience that so early.
Mm-hmm. And talking about experiences, I know you have previously discussed your experience of being harassed, sexually harassed while being a pupil. And obviously that is something that no one should ever experience. So I know this is such a massive question, and I basically want you to, yeah, I just want you to fix everything, basically fix the system. What
I
can
want me to fix everything, but that's probably it's really, really difficult. And then, a lot a theme in a lot of the work in various elements of the sort of feminist inclusion, diversity space is about whose responsibility things are and where the pressure falls. So, it's fantastic. I hope everyone who watches this already knows Bar Council has Tell Spot, which is an amazing resource that allows you to absolutely record contemporaneously any issues, and then make your own decisions about when you release that. It stays confidential on there unless you decide not to. It creates a contemporaneous record, which is obviously hugely valuable. Tells the Bar Council a certain amount about levels of issues, but also then means if there's ongoing conduct, you've got that record. If you decide to take action, great. We now have waiver schemes available to get around the problem of the need to report if there's disclosure to another member of Bar. So I'm involved in the Chancery Bar and Property Bar joint waiver scheme, which has been set up. So that's all great, but it doesn't get over the fundamental point that when you're experiencing the harassment, the banter. And I fear things have not changed anywhere near as much as I let myself believe.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of had probably about 5 years ago, a realization that no, it's that I'm not the target anymore, which is partly about being older and therefore not the target, because young women are far more likely to be the target, and it's partly about my privilege of seniority. So there is that problem that you don't have the power, you don't feel like you can speak out, and actually no one can honestly say to you, you won't pay a price for this. So we have to find a way to shift the culture, and that has to be the responsibility of senior members of the bar, senior, practice managers, chief execs, clerks who work with us. It has to be our responsibility to say no, zero tolerance. Mm-hmm. The only person for whom this subject should be career limiting is the perpetrator. It just has to stop being career limiting or potentially career limiting for those who say this is happening to me. Mm-hmm. Because that's the only way you can actually make it safe for people to say what's happening. And I've dealt with situations with individuals who have only been prepared to disclose to me and ask for help and support on the basis that I make an absolute commitment not to say anything unless they authorize you to. And then you try and persuade them to let you do something about it. And I absolutely understand why, but then they won't. And so we have to lift it off their shoulders. We have to find ways. So everyone has to be alert, to identify the people who behave in those ways, to stop saying, oh, that's just X, that's just how X is. Stop excusing the what might be called lower level activity as banter or being a bit handsy, and understand that in itself creates a huge problem for someone who's experiencing it. And what may be going on when other people have, if that's happening with eyes on, with other people's eyes on them, then it's going to be even worse when they're not. I don't think there is a perfect solution, but what we have to do is try every conceivable thing we come up with, really.
I guess this conversation about rape culture is really kind of happening in the news now when it's being discussed at the school level. And I'm just sorry to say that as an aspiring barrister, I've been told multiple times, when you're a pupil, you just shut up. You don't say anything. You just take whatever you're given. You do whatever you're told to do. And that is really kind of, it's continuing this idea. Yeah.
Not acceptable. And we, I as I said, I am on some levels ashamed to admit that, having gone through my own experience, having then, as I got more secure in my position and more power in my organisation, whilst that individual was still in the same organisation, I set about protecting others and using my privilege. Again, at that point I wouldn't have understood that language, to put it that way, but using my position to protect others, to warn and protect others, and increasingly then to be able to influence so that he wasn't in a position to do the same. And then he wasn't in chambers anymore, which was great. But I sort of, you allow yourself to think it's getting better, and then having conversations with young women and realizing, no, I think it is better in the sense that there's a much larger proportion of the population who are clear it's unacceptable. I certainly felt in the 80s, when it was happening to me, that there wasn't anyone that, if I said something, wouldn't have said to me, oh, it's just that individual, it's just banter, give as good, if you're going to survive in this game, you've got to be able to give as good as you get. And I hope young women now know there are lots of people who don't think like that. But as long as they feel it could be career limiting, you're being put in an absolutely invidious position.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a lot of work to be done on this, and we're gonna
Keep at
really we're never gonna be done, but we can only try, really, can't we?
Yeah, keep making it better. Keep
Yeah,
driving forward.
one step at a time. Moving on to a completely different topic, but still, in the era of kind of difficulties, because this last year has been very challenging, I think, for anyone to different degrees. But it has been a very challenging year, and I just kind of wanted to know whether you had a daily ritual that you had developed or that you had before and you've been doing, and whether you can recommend it.
Cycling. Now, anyone who knows me knows that my motto has long been minimum exertion, maximum exhilaration, hence bungee jumping and things. But bizarrely, so I've always avoided exercise. I hated exercise at school. I remember Michael Mosley doing a documentary where he said actually there are about 15% of the population who don't get the endorphins when they exercise, no matter what they do. I'm absolutely one of those people. So thank you to him for letting me know I wasn't going crazy and the only person in the world that never gets that high. But my partner, it took me about 3 weeks after lockdown started to work out that I was being kept prisoner. That she wasn't letting me out at all. And I sort of like, why is it every time I say I'll go and do that, you say no? Don't trust you to be careful enough. So I realized that the only way I was going to get out was to go and do some exercise. So I started cycling. I had a bike at the back of the hall that had been sat there for 5 years, probably cycled on it about 4 times when I first bought it with lots of good intention and done nothing. So I started cycling, and it became my sort of first 20 minutes, and I didn't get very far. And it just became the thing that I did when I stopped for the day. So I have heard people call it a faux commute. I never saw it as a faux commute, but it was just my switch off. And it combined. I love the city of London. I just love the city. So it combined. I could cycle around, getting some fresh air, getting a sort of sense of not speed because I wasn't fast, but at least a bit of that. Looking at houses and roads and getting to know my area a lot better, and just sort of switch my head off. And I'm up in Leeds at the moment doing a trial, and gosh, I'm missing it so much because for over a year I've been cycling every day. And at weekends we just go and cycle for an hour or something, and I like to cycle literally into the city of London and go up all the alleys and find things. So yeah, but I think it's about creating that bit of headspace, isn't it? That's what it's really about.
Yeah, I'm one of those very stereotypical people that got a dog in lockdown. So I have a puppy.
A lot of those.
Yeah. And it's really forcing me every day I have to go to the park, and so it's giving me that like kind of focus of just every day, at least for an hour every day, I have to go to the park, and then I'm exploring this new areas around me, and it's fantastic. It's such a kind of good excuse to just empty your brain a little bit and just breathe in. So absolutely, I understand the feeling, even though maybe there is more exercise with cycling than with a dog. But
well, I mean, bizarrely for me, lockdown has been a journey to health. I've lost a lot of weight, and I'm exercising and feeling very different about the physical me.
So about that, because I've talked to so many people about lockdown, and everyone is just kind of taking it in such a different way. I've talked to people that started baking every day and just became amazing bakers. Others that obviously were really depressed and had a lot of issues with their mental health and were struggling a lot. How has it been for you, like highs and lows?
I have to say it's been mostly really good. I've really enjoyed having this time with Paula. and she's very much an introvert, and I think I've got to understand her and how she works much better. Don't know quite how I'm going to manage then encouraging her to go out again. I miss people desperately. I get a lot of my energy and joy from mixing with people. So whilst Paula is absolutely my favourite person in the world to spend time with, that doesn't mean to say I want to spend, every second I want to spend with her, but I don't want to spend every second with her, if that makes sense. So I do miss other people. I mean, Lowe's have been worrying about my mum and her mental health. She lives alone, and that's really hard. And feeling, as joint head of chambers, very responsible for an organisation working its way through challenging times. But I can't tell you how proud I am of Chambers, which has made some very big decisions and really worked hard. Everyone has pulled together. But yeah, I wouldn't say that's been a low point, but it's been a sort of weight, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just kind of literally like following from what you're saying. I've talked to a lot of friends that are junior barristers, and they may have finished the pupillage right when lockdown started, or maybe like 2 or 3 months before that. And a conversation that we keep having is the fact that they're really struggling building a practice. Like, I mean, in general, I imagine it's quite. It's a lot of work, and during a pandemic it has been really an issue for them. So a lot of them maybe didn't have work for many months, were struggling financially, and even when they do have clients or cases, they just can't seem to build that practice that they've always wanted and worked towards. Do you have any advice for junior barristers?
Oh dear. Well, let's hope we're emerging from it. So it's advice for hitting the ground running as things start to come back to normal. So, one, I think remember that your potential professional clients are like you. So the things you're struggling with, the things that make life difficult for you, probably they're struggling with too. So for me, my brand of being and building professional relationships is about thinking about how I can make my professional clients' life easier, and what actually might be their challenges, and what might fit in and make working with me, not only are they going to get a good service in terms of the substance, but actually it's going to be a plus and easier and a joy to work with me rather than a challenge. So I think, because it's so much, for me, so much about personal relationships. Solicitors have got any number of really good quality barristers out there. If you're talking about the legal skills, the advocacy skills, the drafting, all the rest of it, they've got loads to choose from. You, as a senior clerk, said to me several years ago, when I couldn't understand why my career wasn't going as well as I thought, he said, well, you're really good, solid, safe hands that everyone likes to work with, but you're no one's barrister of choice. And you need to form a critical mass of relationships with people where you're the barrister of choice, because working with them, for them working with you, is a joy, is easy, it feels safe, it feels comfortable, all the things we all want. So that's one. Professional clients are real people too, having the same challenges. And I think the other thing is about being open, because you never know where the opportunities are going to come from. There'll be people that you meet early in your career who look like they're going to be amazing for you and aren't. And there'll be others who, when you look back 30 years on, you realise have travelled with you that 30 years, have, if you're really lucky, have changed firms lots of times, so that they have given you work in one firm, introduced you to other people there, gone off, leaving you with cases in that firm and other people you're then working with, and they've gone to a new firm and they do the same thing. Amazing. But they stick with you because you have a good, strong relationship. And I suppose the other thing is about remembering, with every aspect of what we do, there isn't just one way to do it. There are wrong ways to do things, things that aren't going to work. But actually, there's lots of different ways of doing it. If you look around, the bar is full of very different people who operate in very different ways, have very different personalities, very different relationships with people. You have to find the one that is your way of being it. You know, some people are fabulous at doing seminars. Some people are writers. Some people are really good at building one-on-one connections. Others have to hunt in a pack and sort of be more at an event and things like that, and then they'll sparkle and attract clients and relationships. So yeah, don't think I have to do it this way. It's about looking more widely and thinking about, how can I be the sort of person that other people are going to want to work with?
It's again quite refreshing because, you know, as I'm sure you read on Twitter quite a couple of months ago, it seems like there is still a specific way that we think that a barrister looks like or acts like. So it's still there is still this myth of the barrister.
There's myths related to the bar, but I think they're getting increasingly busted, shall we say.
Brilliant. So again, related to the fact that we're going through a pandemic, and things are different now and hopefully will change. We're not going to go back to the old same ways necessarily. Do you think the UK bar will be different when we come out, whatever this coming out will be, out of the pandemic?
Yeah, I hope that it will. I mean, the obvious in terms of technology, the bar as a profession has tended to be sort of slow to change. Video conferencing has been around for a long time. The intensity with which we've had to use it has had two benefits. I think actually it's improved because in terms of the providers, they've had to up their game. But also we've all got far more comfortable with it. Now, you know, I don't like spending whole days on Zoom or Teams, but I know I can. I know I can do lots of things, and certainly I don't envisage going back to all my business development being in person. So, yes, obviously. But your reach by being online is much, much wider. You know, it overcomes geographical issues. It overcomes issues in terms of people's timing and their caring commitments, that actually they haven't got to travel to a place. It's just the quality time doing the event, nothing else. Disability, you know, there are so many ways in which it opens things up. So yes, I think for our substantive work and for our practice building, we will be using the facility that this gives us, but it won't be exclusively that, as it has been for a while. I hope lots of trees will get saved. I'm trying very hard to reduce my paper, and the reality is, I know in our chambers, you know, there's files that are sitting on shelves in Lincoln's Inn that have been there since March before this one, and people have managed. So I think it's given us a big shove forward in terms of using technology. I hope also it will give people, I mean, there's been so much work done, the amazing Rachel Spearing really driving it around wellbeing at the bar. And I think we therefore were in a place where thinking about the effect that the pandemic has had is something the bar is more open to. And I certainly am feeling like there are likely to be people who really struggle with it opening up.
Mm-hmm.
That, because it's been scary to go out, it's been risky to go out. We haven't been in spaces with large numbers of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that we're in a place where people will be far more sensitive to that and thinking about how to make that doable for fellow members of the bar, staff in chambers, but also for clients.
Mm-hmm.
That we'll have a bit more awareness about our environment and the context in which we're operating and how that might impact on people.
Giving options. At the end of the day, that's it, right?
Yeah.
Some
Having
people
much more consciousness and stopping and thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about, again, introverts, but also people maybe that are differently able have found a lot of events are now online, and that is an option for them to actually go through them. Or just think even within the bar that, everything related to the inns is really London centric. And a lot of people that are not in London have been able to access a lot more things when everything is online. So yeah, it's giving options, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with everything opening up, we started, hopefully it's going to increase. What is the one thing that you cannot wait to do?
Go to the theatre.
Oh.
Particularly the Old Vic. I have a real emotional attachment to the Old Vic. I remember being taken there as a kid. My parents both loved it as a theatre.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved, having been originally someone who lived in North London when I came to university in London. I moved to South London because I thought, I love Waterloo Bridge, and if I live in South London, I get to go over Waterloo Bridge every day on my motorbike. So going past the Old Vic is something I do constantly. And when we went into lockdown, they put up in lights over the top, "We'll be back," which made me, I feel quite emotional thinking about it. Made me feel very emotional and sort of reassured at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can't wait to go to the theatre. I love the theatre, but particularly the Old Vic.
And do you remember what's the last play you saw?
Gosh, I don't. I can't think what the last play I saw was.
No?
No.
It was actually one of the last activities I did right before lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
I went to see Fleabag at the National Theatre.
Wow, I missed it.
Oh my gosh, it was fantastic. I recommend it if you get a chance at some point. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, how do you feel about, sorry, random question, but how do you feel about theatres being kind of taken over and used as court spaces at the moment?
Oh, that's interesting. Now, where was it? There was a discussion going on about that the other day that I was involved with. I think, and it hadn't occurred to me to this discussion, and I want to give credit to the person who was saying it, who really made me stop and think, and I can't remember who they were, but saying that it's really problematic that particularly where it's community theatre, which serves a purpose for sections of society that may also interact with the criminal justice system or the family justice system, to have those spaces being used for the justice system, which has may have very negative connotations, is very problematic. And I really hadn't thought about that. In fact, up here in Leeds, we've been in the Nightingale Court, which is in a Leeds University building. It's lecture space, which makes perfect sense. But yeah, the use of art spaces, I can see, is problematic.
Yeah, it's kind of making a connection between the legal system and culture and arts, that is something that shouldn't necessarily be connected. So yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead with another really random question that has nothing to do with anything. If you could choose a historical person and have dinner with them, who would it be?
Well, my not very historical person would be Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I think my more historical, probably Anne Lister, as in Gentleman Jack. I mean, wow, what a way to live. And just to, be able to sit down. We've got the diaries, so we can get into her head more than you often can, but actually to really understand what living that sort of, I suppose what I identify is the inside outside, being an insider, an outsider inside, which goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning, my sort of sense of myself at the bar for a lot of my career. Yeah.
Well, dinner with both would be very interesting.
Oh, it would be amazing, wouldn't it? Amazing.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I would be invited. So just putting that out there. Now going back a bit to discussing the bar and things to do. What would you say is the hardest part about being an intersectional woman at the bar?
I think, what do I think? Gosh, that there's so much work to do on one level, because the bar is what it is and the place it has in our society, which for me makes it all the more important we get it right. We're there to actually facilitate the administration of justice, give access to justice for all, equal access for all, to ensure that it's fair and it's working, and to fight for all, whoever our clients are, but also as a feeder profession for the judiciary. So the role in the justice system, but then also the role all of that has in keeping as a sort of check and balance within our democracy. So it's so important for me that the bar is inclusive and representative, and it isn't. And it's better than it has been historically, but it couldn't have been worse. But it's still got such a long way to go across so many levels. And yeah, I suppose, inevitably we do it to ourselves, don't we? There's that guilt. I try to say to myself, the only guilt I know is the gold stuff around paintings. But, it's sort of, I think everyone accesses the sort of work and the need and the understanding around diversity and inclusion from either their own characteristics or the characteristics and the lived experience of someone that they have a strong personal emotional connection to. That's how it starts to sort of appear for you and you understand it. And then for any individual, there may be of their own or very close to them more than one characteristic aspect that starts you understanding how there can be visible and invisible characteristics that make a difference, and how the mechanics differ in those situations. But it's getting people to take that leap and then think about the whole picture. And the things that they don't have a connection with and don't have an understanding of. And an immediate, easy way of getting to understand, but being alive to and open to and engaged with making sure this is a space that works for all those people, whether you can see that they're there or not. And that is really hard. And we can deal with, it's very easy to deal with the explicit. Oh, it's not very easy to deal with the explicit, but it's much easier to deal with the explicit. With the majority of people, we're now in the harder to grapple with, the structural, the institutional, that some would say isn't there.
I'm so happy you said that. I was going to make that comment. But yeah, there is no such thing as institutional discrimination. So we're all aware of that. I think it's fantastic. And I think it's making that leap with humility as well. I constantly feel completely ignorant about everything, and I every day discover something else that I didn't know, and experiences that other people have that I didn't even know could happen or exist.
Yeah, you have to be brave enough and humble enough
Mm-hmm.
to be willing to step forward,
Mm-hmm.
to be seen, to be heard, to be active, which as barristers we should be, and to get it wrong, and to be told you've got it wrong, and to trust that if you do it with respect and humanity, someone will see that you're coming at it from the right place, that you're listening before you're speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore learning. And if you've got it wrong, you won't do that again.
Mm-hmm.
A very early experience of that in junior school, having the living daylights beaten out of me by a girl who was, I think, a year older than me and a lot larger than me, because I referred to her as coloured, which was language that was used in the 70s when I was at primary school, late 60s, early 70s. And she informed me she was not sky blue pink with yellow dots. And then properly beat me up. And that taught me the importance of language and how, and she wasn't, I knew her in the school, she wasn't a particularly aggressive person. But that really touched something in her, and seeing the strength of her response to it taught me something very young about language and about respecting people and understanding how they identify and being respectful of that.
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of advice when I was at junior school about various things.
Oh, no. I kind of want to take from what you just said and kind of lead into the next question, which I really wanted to be, what's the best part about being an intersectional woman? Because we're constantly talking about how hard it is and there is so much work to do, but what's fantastic about being a brilliant intersectional woman at the bar like you are?
It's the women I speak to. It's the conversations that you can have. It's the making connections with women with a huge variety of lived experience, from whom I learn, by whom I get inspired, by whom I get energized. And that can be, and you never know where it's coming from. You start a conversation with a woman and it's a real conversation, a conversation about what they really think and feel and experience. And sometimes it can be quite distressing, but even when the subject matter is distressing, that sort of feeling that I've learnt more, I've understood more about humanity and the human experience and a different perspective, that always leaves me feeling richer, stronger, with more perhaps to fight about sometimes. But yeah, I mean, women are not one homogenous group. When I talk to female colleagues in chambers, even talking about being women at the bar, I'm child-free, gloriously, happily child-free. Many of my colleagues are not. And that's a very, very different experience. And we have lots of things in common in our experience, but actually the understanding they can give me about that experience and where I can use the fact that I'm understanding that, but not someone with children, to use my position to actually make a difference for them. So it's all that stuff.
Absolutely. And talking about the many different types of women that exist, how can we do you have any tips that can help us be a better ally to other women and other individuals in general? But
I mean, it goes back to what we were saying before about the being brave and being humble and being prepared to getting it wrong and be told you've got it wrong. For me, being a trans ally is scary, deeply important, something I constantly feel I'm not doing enough of, because that for me, the dialogue around trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming people is so toxic. For me, it really touches the connection of knowing that it's much of the same rhetoric that was used about particularly gay men, but women as well, is not so long ago. So for me, I see it as coming from the same places. And yeah, it's so that's something that for me is really important to do and be, but it's not easy. It's scary. Every time I send a tweet, I think today's the day it's going to come down on my head. But trying to keep the dialogue and the conversation and keep it constructive and try and be a way for people who have the opposite view to me to perhaps have somewhere to have a sensible conversation and stop and think. Just think about each other and respecting all of us. The human condition and the impact this stuff has on us, something we all know and understand. We all know what it feels like. Even if you're the most privileged individual, there will be an occasion you felt like, this isn't my club, I don't belong here. And so we can all connect with that feeling and then start to think, when someone is being made to feel that, being told that constantly, what does that do to you? How off kilter do I feel on the occasions it happens to me? And for me, it's much less now than it used to be, because I have all sorts of privileges. It's a painful thing to experience, feeling that you don't belong, that you're being judged, that you're being rejected, that you're being told that you're not acceptable or whatever. So yeah, but it's really not easy to have those conversations. And sometimes I get it wrong and I'm told by a trans person, no, that's not it at all. And I have to be prepared to say, okay, I'm sorry, let me listen again, let me try and understand better.
Well, I guess if it's difficult for us to have that conversation, I can only kind of imagine what it is for someone that is being attacked for who they are.
Which is exactly why allies are important. And it comes back to what we were talking about before. Whose responsibility is it? It can't be the responsibility of the people who are being damaged, hurt, crushed by whatever it is you're talking about. It has to be, for me, I feel, if it's something that I'm standing by and seeing happening to others that's not directed at me, then I'm much better placed to step in and say, hang on a minute, can I just ask you to look at what's happening here? Can I just ask you whether you really think that's okay? I'm much better placed to do that than the person who's on the receiving end of it.
So what's the next most pressing issue at the bar? What's the next thing we're going to tackle at the bar?
Oh gosh, there's so many. And I'm very much, like I was just saying, in terms of developing your career, there is a thing about opportunity, and never, in terms of my sort of activism and my work in this space, I am involved in specific things at points in time, sometimes because I've set them off, sometimes because someone else has set them off. And it's about scanning around and thinking, yeah, that looks like right time, right place, right people. That's something that's really going to make a difference. Sometimes it's a really tiny thing that comes up and you think, actually, I can amplify that, or I can support that in some way. So I'm never like, this is the thing and it's only this thing. And I probably should say more no to more stuff than I do, but there we go. So for me at the moment, the biggest thing that I'm working on, which aligns with what I think is critical, is the bar leadership program. And the thing that's critical, I think, is progression and retention. Entry level is not sorted. I'm not going, it's absolutely not sorted, but a lot of work and attention has gone on to entry level. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think there's a real risk that you do that. And if you don't do the work around progression and retention as well, then you're inviting a more diverse cohort in for what? And what is going to happen if they then are not progressing and seeing that their progression is at least within spitting distance of your stock standard establishment barrister? What's going to happen is they're going to stop coming. So you put all the effort in at entry level, then people get really hacked off, heartened because they don't see it translating. And let's be honest, entry level for the bar from a gender point of view has been around equal for over 20 years. That should then have translated to silk, to entry level judiciary. Getting there with some bits of the judiciary. We haven't got there with silk. So for me, if we don't start putting as much, if not more effort into that middle section of the bar and sorting out across gender, ethnicity, let's do the lot, then we risk sliding backwards, I think is my fear. So having said there's not one thing, for me that is a big thing and that is really important, but I'm always open to look for other things coming up as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we very much agree. We're just starting a mentoring program that is kind of trying to be a multi-layered mentoring program so that any woman can have a mentor at any point of her life and career. And we thought that was really important because retention rates are scary.
And there's there's a lot of work at entry level. There's quite a bit of work at the point of actually, applying for silk judiciary. And then there's this desert that's not fair. And certainly Bar Council with its, I forget what it's called, 7-year something. So that there is more at the moment starting around progression and retention. But there are a lot of members of the bar who, sort of having got a tenancy, do not see or feel that there is much to help them until they get to that sort of, oh, now I'm ready to apply for things, or now I'm starting to think about applying for things. And so I think that both there needs to be more work done around that, but also the stuff that is going on is not reaching those who might benefit from it. And we're hugely problematic as a self-employed profession who, when we've got a case on, our head disappears into it and that's what you're focused on. So we're not actually focused on ourselves, apart from every so often we can stick up our head and say, well, this isn't right, this isn't working. And, I know from being involved in SBAs and various things, you sort of pump out communications and it's not necessarily reaching people. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but there does need to be amplification of what's there, but also a lot more work.
And what about in your area of law, so in property law, what's the big issue that needs to be tackled?
Oh, I mean, you mean literally, substantively? Landlord and tenant law is the balance is really out of whack. And the pandemic in some ways has flipped it back the other way, but now it's wildly out of whack the other way. And it's for far too long, the sort of political vagaries that have shifted and flipped back the balance between, in a residential context, particularly landlords and tenants, and how much security power they respectively have has been, you know, always go to one extreme or the other. One work out a sensible way forward. But with the pandemic, it's really played to the sort of idea that landlords are big bad investors with pots of money, and tenants, poor little tenants, you know, and then you have a case dealing with a big multinational or national high street company that, yes, obviously has been hit by the pandemic, but you know, has a lot of resources and capital and is selling online, etc. And the landlord is actually some smaller entity, individuals, it's their pension or pension funds. A huge proportion of the population have their pensions tied up in property. So in reality, when we say landlords suck it up and allow large tenants to just get away with taking advantage of not paying their rent, people's pensions that are being affected. So it is wildly out of whack at the moment. And when it all starts to be dealt with, the courts are not going to be ready to deal with it. They're not going to have the capacity. So it's hugely problematic.
So much work to do everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid my mother, I've mentioned her a few times, worked as a social worker for a long time, and she took great pleasure in the fact that my profession was possibly more hated than hers. I was never convinced that was actually right. But she says, I can remember her saying to me with glee, well, your profession just lives off other people's misery and catastrophes. Which there is some truth in. The sad reality is when there's an economic boom or an economic crash, whatever is going on, if there's change, there's more work for us. That is a reality.
Brie, I've kept you on for such a long time, but I swear I'm almost done. I could talk to you forever, but I'm almost done. I've lost 3 questions for you.
Okay.
Quick. No, one is sweet and easy. I just wondered whether you had a movie, music, book, anything that you want to plug that is giving you joy, energy, maybe a play that you've seen before lockdown, anything like that.
Well, I mean, your audience would have read The Invisible Woman, so you know, if you want to get angry and get active, that's the one to read, I think. I don't know. No, can't think of anything else. Soaps. They're what I switch my head off to.
Brilliant. We'll take The Invisible Woman.
And I am loving. I looked on Twitter yesterday because I caught up with Emmerdale and Matty, the trans man, talking about surgery and how he experienced his body. And I thought, this is great stuff. Just, you know, in a soap. I mean, in fairness, the soaps have dealt with trans for quite a long time. So, but there was nothing on Twitter, but maybe I was not looking properly.
Those are really good recommendations. So another, I feel like this is going to be another one that is quite quick and easy. Do you think the bar needs intersectional feminism or feminism and intersectionality?
Oh yes, I think that's quite clear from everything.
From the conversation. And why?
Why? Because it'll make the bar better, richer. It'll make it do what it's supposed to do, representing all of our society, and bringing all those perspectives. I'm absolutely sold on the idea that diversity of views, of voices, of perspectives makes things richer and better and work more effectively.
Brilliant, thank you. And last question for today, because then I have many more questions for you for another day. is what do you think Themis can do? What should we focus on? It can be a project, it can be a topic, it can be anything. What's your big tip for us?
Well, I know you're focusing on pay, incomes, and the inequality there. And I think that's a really important one, particularly in light of the research that has been done on a wider scale about the way as women move into industries that they become less remunerated. Yeah. Computer programmers paid large sums when it was all men, and then once it was worked out that women were very good at this and were doing it in large numbers proportionate to other careers, it paid less. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And it's more acute than in other areas because we're self-employed. And so there aren't another thing at WOW, we mentioned WOW. There have been some amazing workshops there about sort of financial health. And, women coming to the bar women generally are inclined not to look after their financial health. And to have less capacity to do so, and then being self-employed and at the bar, you're even more vulnerable. So I do think that is incredibly important. So maybe the incomes, but also looking at that wider financial health and providing for yourself in your retirement, she says, and she's cracking on compared to you.
Well, I know that you're part of our equal pay project. So we're very appreciative of that. And we're so happy to have you on board. Very grateful for that. And for tonight, thank you so much for staying for an hour with me. I appreciate it. I said it was going to be 20 minutes. So
I think it's my fault rather than yours. Going on way too much. So you'll cut loads of this now.
It was absolutely lovely to talk to you. And again, I will probably just have to have another of these conversations with you because I have so many more questions. And you're just a very inspirational woman. So thank you so much for meeting me and for doing this interview with me.
You're very welcome. I've really enjoyed it. It's a lovely way to spend an hour, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I'm going to do it. Here we